today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the moon. Find me some.
The Monday Morning Quarterback on the 23rd of July 2018 from WBRN Radio via the Boston Red Network. Interesting situation we have in our part of the presentation. Senator Bernie Sanders talking about Medicare for all. He's there with the candidate from that won the seat in Brooklyn, Ms. Ocho. Nonetheless, they're in Kansas and they're talking to working people. We're going to spend some of our time on this particular report talking about working people, the state of the trade unions and where the Trump administration is going with them, the anti-union campaign there. And what we will attempt to do is to make a dichotomy between, a distinction I should say, between some of these so-called right-wing populist movements and the actual plight of working people. They need to be separated out, because what is happening here is you have a lot of jingoism, but at the same time you have nothing but anti-worker sentiment. The Trump administration has been anti-worker, attack on government workers, the castigation and castration of government workers' unions, forcing them out of government buildings, and rewriting, it's not reforming, work rules. So these are some of the things that are happening under this spell that some people came under, that this administration would usher in jobs, but jobs at what cost? If they're destroying unions, the jobs themselves will be jobs, but jobs at very, very little compensation. We'll talk about that and what is happening with the economy in terms of the recent boom has been more or less fueled by Trump supporters. In other words, the bottom 40%. But now they are getting in trouble. It's being funded increasingly by plastic, in other words, credit cards, automobile loans, etc. We'll take a look there. We'll start off here with an article from the New York Times, and this is Trump nominees mastermind of anti-union legal campaign. This is a fella, this is on the 18th of July, Narmer Sherbler, I suppose, get the name right here. Even before the Supreme Court struck down mandatory union fees for government workers last month, the next phase of the conservative legal campaign against public sector workers was underway. In March, the decision looming, lawyers representing government workers in Washington State asked the federal court to order one of the state's largest public employee unions to refund fees that non-members had paid. Similar lawsuits were filed in California, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, and Ohio. Discards. They said here the complaint could upend the legal system by arguing that states and private parties like unions face liability even though they follow the law as existed at the time. That could cost unions hundreds of millions of dollars. Beyond their legal claims, the cases share another striking detail. The lead counsel in each case was one Jonathan Mitchell. Mitchell, 41, has a formal resume. He was Supreme Court Justice clerk, to Anton Scalia, and worked at the Department of Justice under G.W. Bush, taught at several law schools, including Stanford, spent 4 years as a Solicitor General in Texas after the 2016 election. He served as a volunteer on the Trump transition team, where he helped to review future executive orders. In September, the president nominated him to head the Administrative Conference of the United States, a small federal agency that advises the government on improving its interworking. His nomination awaits action by the Senate after the Judiciary Committee approved him on a one-party line in March. In the meantime, Mitchell appears to be the driving force behind anti-union legislation, suggesting a well-coordinated effort. In an email, he declined to discuss the matter, citing his pending nomination. His co-counsel in the Washington State case, one Hannah Sells, a lawyer from the so-called Free Market Freedom Foundation, said she met Mitchell less than 1 year ago at an event by the Federalist Society. They keep reappearing here. The conservative legal organization. He expressed interest in working on a litigation related to union membership and mandatory fees. Jonathan's a brilliant legal mind. I'm a first-year attorney, she said. Visionary. I think this is the right way to put it. Kermit Roosevelt of the Roosevelt family, an expert on retroactive constitutional claims at the University of Pennsylvania's law school, said Mitchell's legal reasoning would be very destabilizing beyond union matters if it gained significant traction in the court. For instance, he said if a future Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions, applicants denied admission under the previous policy would be able to win damage awards retroactively tied to their rejection. Courts have been sympathetic to same-sex marriage spouses seeking to recover benefits of property they were denied before the Supreme Court's recent decision on same-sex marriage. But courts have specifically rejected such retroactive arguments so far in the context of union fees. In a 2014 ruling, the court struck down mandatory union fees for home-based workers paid through government programs such as Medicaid. The federal district judge dismissed at least 3 lawsuits seeking refunds of workers' mandatory fees. A fourth case had begun earlier, was settled after a judge denied the plaintiff's class action certification. In 3 cases, the judge found that unions could claim a good faith defense because they followed seemingly vital state laws requiring the fees. As one judge put it, that only later deemed to be unconstitutional. No appeals courts overturned such a ruling. Even so, Mitchell and his allies may get a favorable reception in the court that really matters, the Supreme Court. The court has shown itself to be so hostile to workers' rights that they'll find a way. That is from Sharon Block of the Labor and Work-Life Program at Harvard Law School, and is a former senior Labor Department official and a National Labor Relations Board member. William Brody, a libertarian-minded professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago, said the Supreme Court proves less sympathetic than lower courts to good faith defenses for private parties like unions. If I were a union, I'd really be nervous. Mr. I guess Bodie said he was called for a brief. We were looking at the brief a few days ago, defending mandatory union fees in cases that led the Supreme Court to rule against those fees last month. Brody brief argued that the fees were consistent with unconventional government practices in other areas. Both he and Ms. Block said the court's decision last month indicated that the conservative majority might rule that fees should be refunded retroactively. This would be a catastrophic thing for trade unions. It would bankrupt many trade unions. Amidst the possibility, Mitchell's central role in his ties to Trump loom large. On one level, Mitchell appears well suited to head the administrative conference and weigh in on such technical questions as how to make the process of creating regulations more efficient and democratic. He's not interested in that. And how to reduce the backlog facing immigration judges and administrative law judges like those who preside over Social Security hearings. The agency's most recent chairman, Paul Verkuin, a law professor and dean who was appointed by Barack Obama and served on until 2015, said he had spoken with Mitchell and had come away with the impression he knows the administrative law field very well. He is a smart guy. The agency has been run by an acting chairman since Vikram left. In other words, Mitchell is a curious choice, by one that reflects Trump's impatience with norms that historically constrain the federal government, while the president's nominees, members of their own party, as chief, the conference tends to be studious, bipartisan in its approach. Richard Kim, a chief of staff to Vice President Gore, and Joe Biden, and Theodore Olson, who was Solicitor General under Bush, and Anton Scalia even ran the agency. Didn't know that. But portions of Mitchell's background at least reflects a legal argument he has advanced, are nobly conservative on the culture war issues. In cases he argued before the Supreme Court, same-sex marriage. Mitchell represented two Houston taxpayers who sued the city to deny benefits of same-sex marriage couples. Mitchell is bad news. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a Rhode Island Democrat who opposed the nomination of the Judiciary Committee, said Mitchell's role in the case raises questions about his suitability for the federal position. And then there are the union cases, which Mitchell filed after his nomination to head the conference, which could also suggest a free market worldview hostile to regulations. These people are not hostile to regulations that favor them. They are hostile to regulations that favor ordinary people. Mitchell disclosed his involvement in the case of the Judiciary Committee administrative conference this week, although he declined to explain how he got involved. He denied that the conservative groups were financing the case. You can't bring those into agencies or that kind of stuff, he said. The first job of the chair is to make sure its credibility is maintained, enhanced. I doubt if that'll happen. And he's representing clients there. So in other words, this won't be a studious operation. It'll just be a front, and that will all it will be. Let's go now to Omaha, Nebraska, where there's a will, there's a wedge. Angelica Dunn and Isaiah Hall said in a community college classroom. This is fixated on a woman in a blazer reaching behind a desk and lifting props into the air. First an empty coffee cup, then a sour cream container, and then a foam cooler for Omaha steaks. $13 an hour, she said. That was the wage for starting a full-time job of packing these products into boxes during the graveyard shift. This is the graveyard shift at Airlight Plastics. After that, she said promotions that they could learn to drive a forklift, manage a team, get a reimbursement for taking college courses. They'd have insurance and a chance to make enough to buy a car, secure a mortgage maybe in Omaha, and all the fixtures of middle-class life that had been eluding so many people in North Omaha, particularly young African Americans like Isaiah and Jellicoe. For decades, thinkers from economists to politicians to pastors have searched for ways to reduce unemployment gaps between African Americans and Europeans. Since 2007, more than 1,000 Omaha residents, mostly African Americans and low incomes, have landed jobs in the growing manufacturing and tech sector through targeted employment training in the city's worst neighborhoods. The training began popping up after a local newspaper series noted that the booming Midwestern city had some of the most alarming racial disparities ever. Back then, 4.7% of Europeans in Omaha were unemployed. That's a fairly high number. But for African Americans, the number was 17.2. That's according to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. In 2016, the most accurate numbers available, the rates had dwindled to 3.9 for Europeans and 8.9 for African Americans. It basically almost cut it in half, not quite in half. It did cut in half. One of the nation's 70 largest metro areas with statistically significant populations of African Americans and European residents has only 28 have shrunk the employment gap. None faster than Omaha. Well, Warren Buffett is there. He should have done more. The city progressed in partially due to programs such as bi-monthly ones that Angelica and Isaiah were at the Metropolitan Community College. She told the group that there had been a lot of retirement cakes at the 1,000-person company lately, but business has been growing, so it was eager to attract workers from neighborhoods where traditionally had trouble finding qualified applicants. A trainee can make it through the program. The company would at least grant them an interview. Interesting. The front row, 21-year-old college dropout who said he was done waiting for all of the chances that he'd received in his life. So these are two of the people here, and we were looking at this is in the Omaha Herald, which is owned by Warren Buffett and Company, from the Archives Poverty and Prosperity, the worst in the nation. Child poverty rates for Africa among the 100 largest metro areas. This is in 2005, more than 10 years ago. Omaha was number one in Knoxville, Tennessee, Toledo, Ohio, Syracuse, New York, and Oklahoma City. Omaha at 59.4, Knoxville at 58, and Oklahoma City at 49.7. Other cities, New Orleans at 44, Detroit at 40.7, and Chicago at 37.6. The average is 30%. In Los Angeles, it's 28.9. In New York, 27%. The highest African American poverty rates in the 100 largest areas. This is back again. Syracuse is first, Toledo, Ohio, and Omaha is number 3 at 40.4. And Madison, Wisconsin, amazingly at 36.9. Other cities, Milwaukee at 34.40. Minneapolis, St. Paul at 33.8. There in Oklahoma City at 33.30. Kansas City at 27.80, Detroit at 27.70, Chicago at 27.1, and .10. Anyway, in St. Louis at 26.20 percentage there, and Denver at 20, and New York at 19. Omaha's in poverty this is 2005, 81,000, and 52% of Europeans, and 28% of African Americans, 11% of Latino. And the population of African people at that time was 63,903. The poverty rate at 40.4. Child poverty rate at 59.4, and the unemployment rate at 17.5. Holding college degrees in Omaha, let's see, 16.3. Excuse me. Families, married parents at 38.6, single mothers at 53%, teenage births at 22%. Now remember, this is 10 years ago. Households without a vehicle, a car, whatever, 23.3%. Households receiving food subsidies, 29.5%. Infant mortality rate per 1,000 births, 14.9%. Incarceration rate, this is per 10,000 residents, 146.6. Almost a decade ago, incomes for Omaha African Americans was 7% above the average for all African Americans nationally today. And this is kind of interesting. 4 decades ago, actually. Sorry about that. 4 decades ago, African Americans were doing rather well. That average for African Americans nationally, 7% above, I should say that. Now it's almost 30% below. So in other words, African Americans had went in the wrong direction. Poverty rate for African Americans has been going up since 2001. It was 30% in 2000, and now it's 44.1% in 2005. Don't know what it is now. These are 10-year ago figures. Anyway, you can kind of understand what happens in a city. This is from Reuters. We thought we'd bring this in. We won't get the whole article in, but mortgages, Groupon, and credit card debt, how the bottom half boosts the U.S. economy. By every measurement, the U.S. economy is booming. This is out of Philadelphia. A look behind the headlines. Roaring job growth and consumer spending reveals the lower bottom continues in a large part. The boom, continues in large part by the poorest half of Americans. Reuters analysis of household data shows that at the bottom, 60% of income earners have accounted for most of the rise in spending over the past 2 years, even as finances worsened. It breaks with a decade-old 10-year trend where the top 40% had been the primary fuel of consumption growth. With borrowing costs on the rise, inflation's picking up, the effects of Trump's tax cuts to wear off, a negative shock further rise in gasoline prices, a jump in the cost of goods due to tariffs that could push those most vulnerable over the edge. That in turn could threaten the second largest expansion, given consumption makes up 70% of the economy. To be sure, housing market is far more dangerous level. Is from a far more dangerous level reached in 2007 before the crash. It's far from, I'm sorry. And unemployment is the lowest since 2000. Well, yeah, but this is not really the whole story. In fact, a growing majority of Americans say they are comfortable financially, according to the Federal Reserve survey. That is kind of doubtful. And they cite some people here. A certified medical assistant at Drexel University, that is in Philadelphia, experienced it firsthand 3 years ago, confident that a full-time job offered enough financial security. She took out a loan to buy a Honda Odyssey and roughly a $20,000 house where she lives with her mother and aunt. Since then, she's learned that making $16 and 47 cents an hour, more than 40% of U.S. workers, was not enough. That's a disparaging story right there. Also dipping into her savings account every month to just make all the payments, as she said, with her savings down to $900 from $10,000. She has started to budget everything from electricity, cable TV to toilet paper and Groupon movies anyway. So this is pretty much the story. Some economists say that without the $1.5 trillion tax cut enacted in January, spending, which has grown by 3% a year over the past few years, could already be stalled. So this is a very, very troubling situation, and the rising income of the upper 40% of earners has driven most of the consumption growth, but as in the past, but since 2016, consumer spending has primarily been fueled by a rundown in savings, mainly from the bottom 60%. Oxford Economics brought that one in. And a very, very troubling situation there. And they cite some other personal cases here that many Americans lack any financial safety net remains a concern. That's the New York Fed John Williams told Reuters in an interview last month. Even though the overall picture is pretty good, pretty solid and strong, he said this is a problem that continues to hang over half of the country. When you have that, you do have actually some problems here. From the New York Times editorial here about Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, some dinosaur broadcasters that VI Putin decided they would register, and they have registered there. And of course, RT is registered in this country. I won't go. This is kind of an interesting article here. This is by Sally Jenkins. She's a religious person there. The NFL anthem debate is a case of misplaced emphasis, but patriotism and football are a volatile mix. No doubt about that. We'll start it off. The most interesting question in the NFL national anthem controversy has always been, why is it so potent? How is it that a small gesture, a handful of players on their taking a knee? The answer is the fact that somewhere along the line, NFL football became a liturgy of empire. To borrow a phrase, it is a brand of a civil religion, if you like it. Set aside from that moment, you want your NFL teams to be mindless, the obedient clogs in the machinery of a potent patriotic state. Very, very dangerous there. To their credit, the Commissioner Goodell and the NFL players have decided they won't be dictated by DJ Trump. Thank you for your thoughts, but we'll take it from here. That's Player Representative Eric Winston tweeted in reply to the president's demand that any player who doesn't stand for the anthem would, on his heart during the would be suspended. So, but to find a resolution, various NFL factions first need to understand why the controversy burned so hot in the first place. billionaire owners, players, etc. Hence the failed appeasement of politics and inability to foresee that leaving it to individual teams, whereas it to discipline a player. The volatile marriage of patriotism and football is as old as the sport, and this goes back a long ways. The rise of the game closely followed the American frontier. The Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Columbia Intercollegiate Football Association, that was in 1876, just 4 months after the annihilation of Custer at Little Bighorn. The game steadily grew in the 1890s after Frederick Jackson Turner declared the frontier officially vanished. Football was a reaction to the fear that American men, with nothing left but to conquer, once the primal wilderness was gone, might have become neurotic and over-civilized. If you were wondering where North Carolina coach Larry Fedora got his idea that if football goes, the nation goes down. Teddy Roosevelt even got into the act. I have no sympathy whatsoever for the the overwrong sentimentality, that would keep a young man in cotton wool. I have a hearty contempt for him if he counts a broken arm or collarbone as a serious consequence when balanced against the chance of showing that he possessed hardhood physical prowess and courage. Charles William Eliot, he was the president of Harvard, wanted to ban it for more brutalizing than prize fighting, cockfighting, or bullfighting. University of Chicago Divinity Professor Shudler Matthews called it boys killing, men mutilating, and money-making education, prostituting, gladiatorial sports. So anyway, get down to her article. It's a very good article. There is a high irony in all of this. The NFL's branch of civil religion. This is basically what she's talking about, to highlight how unchristian the nation can be on the Sabbath. Games have become the chief rival for Sunday morning worship service. If folks aren't tailgating in an NFL parking lot, they're at their children's soccer practice. For most American families, when there's a conflict between sport and church, it's no contest. This is subtly here talking. This is a pastor and writer from Olathe, Kansas, surveyed the history and described as a sport as a liturgy of empire. Maybe this is Sudley. Anyway, Sudley hit on the phrase when he returned to his alma mater, Kansas State, for a football game and realized that the pledge of allegiance and the singing of the national anthem had all the elements of a church service. And this is a very interesting standpoint here. We are on the Monday morning quarterback. Sudley also observed the opposing liturgy of competition and Sabbath-led human beings to draw very different conclusions about life and what it means to be human. Competition teaches us the resources are scarce and conflict is our natural state, and we must work 7 days a week to get ahead, he writes. Competition teaches us that we are generating our lives and we can't slow down. The Sabbath, on the other hand, tells us that we are receiving our lives, that we are precious and deeply loved. Win or draw. You don't need to be a Christian to read something true in Sudley's message, or to feel that the entire NFL debate is about a profound misplaced emphasis enforced patriotism, and of course it's not patriotism at all. regardless of love of country or religious persuasion. Surely all of us will have something better to do than argue over a false, commoditized civil religion that has hijacked the peaceful Sunday and the rest and day of rest. That was pointed out to me. I was organizing, I believe, in North Dakota, and at that time it was mandatory that businesses were closed in the state, and I asked why. Was it a religious thing? He said no, it was the idea of workers having a holiday. Anyway, we'll leave that with Miss Sally Jenkins there, and let's go and check our time, and we'll do the sports, which we hope to do. Well, our preset menu is not preset, but nonetheless we'll get to ESPN.com and do the baseball scores. A major loss for Tiger will lead to a major win. I'm not sure what this is about. I just got here. But we have to look at it. This is in Scotland. Tiger Woods was the old Sunday destroyer in a red, holding possession of a lead in a major, while the open field was going and gone with the win. The contenders there, Mr. Jordan Spieth, defending champion, might as well had been Phil or Ernie in the middle of Tiger's dynasty. And let me just get back and we'll get Tiger here. Oops.
I had a chance starting that back nine to do something, and I didn't do it. I thought today, starting at the day, I saw that Jason played a beautiful round early. Brooksy played another solid round today, and I thought that thought 9 would be the number. You know, there's 3 guys at 9. I figured one of the 3 guys would shoot even par. I know it's tough out there, but I figured I needed to go get that number somehow. And you know, next thing, lo and behold, I'm tied for lead, and then I'm leading it. And you know, that unfortunately I hit a bad 3-iron off the tee there at 10. Grass grabbed my shaft again and hit it left, and I made a couple mistakes there on the green. And same thing at 12. The grass grabbed the shaft. This time I turned it open and made bogey there.
Tiger, can you, looking back, other than the execution of 11 and 12, is there anything you could have done differently or would have done differently?
No. Today I did everything the way that I thought I needed to do it to win the championship. This entire week I felt like I needed to keep building my way into this championship. It's one of those where, as I said early in the week, it's going to be about 10, 12 guys with a chance to win it on Sunday, because we're all driving the same areas, and kind of turned out that way. There are a bunch of guys packed, a bunch of guys with a chance to win, and I was one of them.
Yeah, very interesting there, and we'll put this on the Facebook page. But nonetheless, this is basically what happened there at the Open, and let me just...
I knew I was coming in with with some good golf. My record around here was terrible, so that didn't make me too optimistic about the week. But I just tried to not think about it and focus on hitting good shots day by day. To go the weekend bogey free, it's unthinkable, to be honest. So very proud of today, very proud of, obviously, playing with Tiger was another challenge because of the crowds and everything, but I felt really good this morning when I came here. I felt like I was ready for the challenge. Obviously conscious that it could have gone either way, but I knew I was gonna do my best today.
So, in other words, there were basically 3 people here that could have won that. Could have won the Open there in Scotland. And the Tiger had the crowds going. A point been made in his. Tiger is going to win at least one more major, and he missed the Open at let's see, Shancock Hills. It might not happen next month, but yeah, he will win some more, and that is the theme of this a wild Saturday at the Open. Oops. At the Open, called Karnasky, the Open players there. Anyway, the box office, Francisco Milanre. He captured the jug. Anyway, that was the gentleman you heard earlier there, when he managed to move ahead of the situation. So anyway, let's do Major League Baseball. We are now back, and the caption here was a major loss for Tiger, but will lead to a major win. 25% a chance of rain. Winds were what at 10 to 15, and it was 77 Fahrenheit. That was unusual for Scotland. Anyway, as we get into Major League Baseball on Sunday, the Padres were in Philadelphia. Padres 10-2. The Orioles were in Toronto 5-4. The Red Sox were in the Motor City. Sox 9-1 over the Tigers. The Pirates and Reds, an old classic rivalry here. The Pirates 9-2. The Mariners and Rays in Florida. Rays 6-4. Atlanta and the Nationals in Washington. There was a rain delay, all sorts of things going on there. Anyway, the Nationals finally end up with the game 6-2. The Dodgers and Brewers in Milwaukee was all Dodgers this time around. Mr. Alec Wood was a winner. Mr. Ferguson got the save, 11-2. The Twins and Royals in Kansas City. Royals 5-3 in that contest. The Cardinals and Cubs in Wrigley Field. Cubs had dropped two of these, and we missed today's game. Anyway, nonetheless, 7-2 was the score. Mr. Quintana was the winner. Mr. Myers got the loss for St. Louis. Cleveland and the Rangers in Texas, and Cleveland was shut out. Zip. And the Astros and Angels 14 in Texas, unusual. The Astros were in Los Angeles. Sorry about that. 4-5 was the score. Anyway, nonetheless, the Angels were on top. And in 10, the Giants and Athletics in Oakland, a game that I did tune into. Back and forth. Oakland ended up with the game 6-5. The line score, Giants had 9 hits and 1 error, and Oakland had 8 hits and no errors. Mr. Botch was the winner. Anyway, or got the loss. Sorry about that one. The White Sox and the Mariners in Seattle, it was all Mariners, 8-2. The Rockies and D-backs in Arizona, Diamondbacks 8-1. Zach Greinke got his win there. He's with the Diamondbacks now. Anyway, the Padres and Phillies, I guess his second game, the Phillies shut out the Padres. And the Mets and Yankees, they were rained out. I was looking forward to that game, but they'll make it up in August. So that is the sport from the Open with Mr. Wood in Scotland. Kornowski, whatever it is, I'm mispronouncing the Scottish name here. But nonetheless, the Tiger is back in the motion. So he's One of the problems the Tiger has had before we go out of here is that the Tiger has been hurt. Basically it. So now as the Tiger gets better, he's got some more wins in the tank. And let's just listen to just a
round
little bit.
to give himself this shot.
Shooting 5 under par in that third round put himself in the perfect position going into the final round. But Tiger did it in perfect weather conditions out on that golf course, because in the afternoon of the third round, the wind picked up and the scoring stopped being as good as it was. That's important going into the final round.
Anyway, so much for that. The Monday Morning Quarterback on the 23rd of July, 2018, from WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. Incidentally, you can find us on the iHeart app, on Stitcher, and now on Spotify. We're there. You can go to Spotify and find our programs there. I think they're around 1,000. It varies on some of these networks as to how many we have there, and which networks. So we're on a lot of different networks here, from Spreaker to Blog Talk. Incidentally, in August, we'll do some talk shows over on Blog Talk, because they have that facility there. And there'll be a short version, about 30 minutes or so. So stay tuned. We'll make an announcement prior to it. Have a good week, everyone. Good day.
Going on within the Democratic Party. Last week, we spoke with New York Congressman Joe Crowley, who lost his primary in a stunning upset to a political novice. This week, we welcome the woman who beat him, 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is in Kansas campaigning for Democratic candidates, along with a very familiar figure in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders. Welcome to Face the Nation. It's great to see you both side by side. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you have said it was Senator Sanders who really inspired you to enter the political race in the first place. What is it like for you to be out there campaigning alongside him?
I mean, it's certainly surreal. Just two years ago, we were both in St. Mary's Park in the South Bronx. I was in the crowd with thousands of other people across ages, races, creeds, incomes, and to be here 2 years later pushing that revolution in Kansas is pretty amazing.
Senator Sanders, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez still has a November race to win. What advice are you giving her?
To keep doing what she has done. She ran an extraordinary campaign. And the reason that she won is she ran on ideas that were relevant to the working people in her district. She put together a strong grassroots campaign, and she worked her tail off. And any candidate in America who is prepared to do that, I think, has an excellent chance of winning.
Let's talk about some of the candidates you're out there right now trying to help win. You're in Kansas. That is a solidly, or at least thought of as a solidly pro-Trump red state. It voted overwhelmingly for the president in the last election.
Well, Margaret, I happen to believe passionately that there really is not a blue state, red state division in this country. I think there's a lot of mythology attached to that. People believe that healthcare is a right. People believe we should raise the minimum wage to a living wage. People do not think, as Trump does, that we should give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. But in fact, we have got to demand that the rich start paying their fair share of taxes. So whether you're in Kansas or the Bronx or in Vermont, we have common interests and common aspirations, and we have got to fight for an America that works for all of us, not just the 1%.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, does that populist message bring out new voters?
It absolutely does bring up new voters, and in fact, we found this here in New York. Back home, we expanded the electorate 68% over the last off-year midterm primary. So for us, this is about inspiring people to the polls, giving them something to vote for, creating hope for this nation, and knowing that so long as there are working-class Americans who believe in a prosperous and just future, we will have hope no matter how red the district.
Last week on this program, we had the man you defeated, the New York Congressman Joe Crowley, and he congratulated you on your win. He said you very much deserved it. He also explained two factors he thought that were decisive here. One of them being the year of the woman, he called it, and also the timing of the primary. Are those factors in your view?
Well, I think that the factors that ultimately created our win was the fact that we had bold commitments, and I campaigned on hard commitments of Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, ensuring a Green New Deal for our future, and championing those issues were the reason that we won. We won across demographics. We won. We expanded the electorate ourselves. We did the work of organizing.
So you reject the idea that your gender was a factor here?
I think that in this moment, there's a confluence of factors that makes this moment inspiring. Right now, more women than ever are running for office, and I do think that women want representation in Congress, absolutely. Congress right now is 80% male, and that creates blind spots in our legislation. It means we don't have family leave. We don't have paid maternal and parental leave. Mm-hmm. It means that we don't get the equal pay that we want. So I think those issues certainly were important.
Well, right now there is a female leader within the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi. If you were lucky enough to win in November and come here to Washington, will you support her?
I need to get to Congress first. I need to work on winning my general election. But
you don't see
I'm
her as
excited
the party
to,
leader?
I mean, she's the current party leader, absolutely. And I look forward to be part of that conversation and winning back the House. There is no decision about the party leader until we win the House first.
So you are leaving open the possibility you may endorse her if you win in November?
Yeah.
Senator Sanders, Vladimir Putin was invited to the White House this fall. Do you think it should be withdrawn?
Look, the truth is it's hard to comment on anything that Trump says because he could change his mind tomorrow. But I will tell you that I was absolutely outraged by his behavior in Helsinki, where he really sold the American people out. And it makes me think that either Trump doesn't understand what Russia has done not only to our elections, but to cyber attacks against all parts of our infrastructure. Either he doesn't understand it, or perhaps he is being blackmailed by Russia because they may have compromising information about him. Or perhaps also you have a president who really does have strong authoritarian tendencies, and maybe he admires the kind of government that Putin is running in Russia. And I think all of that is a disgrace and a disservice to the American people. And we have got to make sure that Russia does not interfere, not only in our elections, but in other aspects of our lives.
Well, picking up on that note, because there is some responsibility here on both parties to protect themselves, it was one of your campaign staffers who went to the Clinton campaign and Obama administration to say there were concerns or suspicions here of Russians spreading anti-Clinton messages. How do you protect yourself in the next race against something like that happening?
Well, Margaret, that's a great question, and I don't think anyone knows all of the answers. But one thing we do know is that we need a president who is going to do everything to work with statewide officials all over this country to make sure that when people cast a vote in November, that vote is going to count. Congress has allocated money to beef up and strengthen the protection of our electoral system. The president has got to be aggressive in implementing that. We have a lot of work to do, but the integrity of American democracy is at stake, and we have got to do everything that we can to protect the integrity of our election.
Senator Sanders and Ms. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you so much for joining us in this exciting joint interview. Good to speak to you both. We'll be back in a moment. It's time now for some political analysis. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. Susan Page is the Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Ramesh Ponnuru is a senior editor for the National Review and a columnist at Bloomberg View. And Susan Glasser writes for The New Yorker and is a CNN global affairs analyst. Ramesh, Republicans were critical of President Trump's performance in Helsinki earlier this week. The story changed a few times over the course of this week. We've seen this back and forth before. Is the fallout going to be different this time, and does this compel any action from a Republican Congress?
I think we have seen this before several times. We have seen calls for action from Republicans that have not been answered, and I think that's going to be the case this time. Because fundamentally, as shocked and appalled as a lot of congressional Republicans were, and a lot of members of Trump's own administration were, by Helsinki, they also see the polling that shows that 80% of Republican voters think that Helsinki was a success, which is a sign of how
80%,
which is a sign of how strongly they are supporting President Trump and how much they resent and dislike criticism of him, especially criticism from Republicans. So I'm afraid that that is not going to change this time.
What gets you to 80% thinking it's a success when the administration, as you heard from Senator Graham, hasn't said what they actually talked about or what was achieved?
I think that a lot of Republicans have decided they like President Trump.
Period.
And yes, and then another group of Republicans, maybe they have some misgivings, but when he's being criticized so unfairly by other people, by Democrats, by the media, as they perceive it, they're going to rally to his defense.
Susan, do we have a sense of what was agreed to in this meeting? I mean, we know that the White House rejected at least one offer on Ukraine.
Well, look, I think there's a direct conflict between the accounts offered by the Russians and the very sparse to non-existent information offered by our own government about what, if anything, was agreed to. We just heard Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been, an on-again, off-again useful ally of President Trump on Capitol Hill, saying on the show that he has no idea what, if any, agreements were made. This is astonishing. We are 1 week out from this meeting. The Russians have said there were multiple agreements, and President Putin himself said this. His ambassador to Washington said there were useful, important agreements that were reached on everything from Syria to apparently there were discussions about Ukraine. We know that there was this private conversation about possibly handing over Americans in exchange for allowing Russians to, question or aid the Mueller investigation, which was not shot down immediately by President Trump. Again, astonishing but very incomplete reports. President Trump has not briefed his own government in the way that any other summit would have been handled. This is really an event without precedent in modern American foreign policy.
So, Jeffrey, I mean, if you follow what Ramesh is saying there, it sounds like the more that national security officials stand up and say they're concerned, that the president actually seems to be benefiting.
Well, two quick observations. The first is the truest thing Donald Trump may have ever said is that he has followers who, if he shot someone on Fifth Avenue, would stay with him. I think we're seeing that every day in many different ways. The second point is, unprecedented is the word that we keep having to come back to, right? We have a situation in which the intelligence chiefs of the United States and the defense chiefs of the United States don't know what the president said to the Russian president, don't know what the Russian president said back, and they don't trust the elected president of the United States to advance American interests in these kind of meetings. This is a bad movie in many ways. I mean, this is some paranoid thriller from the 1970s in which a week later it's the Russians who are defining what came out of this meeting. And the American government, has no idea what happened in this meeting between the President of the United States and the Russian president.
And Susan, how do you take the political filter off of this? Because it sounds like, as Senator Graham laid out, there's a constant conflating of issues. There's the intelligence threat, the national security concerns, and then there is the president's constant claim of a witch hunt, and that's where the public seems focused right now.
But, I think Ramesh is right that there's not a titanic change in how voters look at this. But I do think this is a week where things began to change. I think you began to see a greater willingness on the part of Congress to push back a bit. You saw the Senate vote backing up NATO and opposing the idea of turning over Americans, allowing the Russians to question them. And you also saw just the fact that the director of national intelligence and the director of the FBI were willing to do interviews at the Aspen conference was a sign of some pushback in the president's cabinet. I think this week, it's dangerous to say this, I think this was the most tumultuous week of the Trump presidency in some ways. And the other
We're
thing
putting a timestamp on that.
Until next week.
Until next week. The other thing that I think is happening is that some of the consequences of the president's policy are coming home on Russia, on China, on North Korea. Things are not, the president has had a chance to implement his policies. He's not getting the reaction and the results that he wants. So I feel like things are accelerating in a way. I'm not entirely sure where that goes, but I don't think this week is like every other week we've had.
One interesting thing about the isolation of the president in his own party, in his own administration on this issue, is it does suggest that there's a limit to how much Putin is possibly getting from this. I think if you step back, you'd have to say that Russia has managed to trigger a kind of hardening of a bipartisan consensus against Russia. Now, of course, having a president who is not part of that consensus in some ways, that complicates the picture. But the fact is, Congress and much of the administration isn't where he is.
Okay, but listen, he may be a party of one when it comes to American politics, at least on Capitol Hill. But in many ways, Vladimir Putin has he doesn't view things purely the way that we often do through American domestic politics. He has already accomplished much of what he set out to do, first of all, by being accorded the status and recognition of a summit with apparently no conditions whatsoever on Russia to be welcomed back effectively into the community of world powers after remember, this started with the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. That is the first illegal annexation of territory in Europe since the end of World War II. There have been essentially, Donald Trump has now said, never mind, it's okay, we're welcoming you back. He said he wanted to invite him back into the G7. And so, number one, Putin, by merely having the summit, I think won a victory. Secondly, he has basically embarrassed and humiliated the president of the United States. Now, you could say, well, it was the president himself who did it. But this is something that has an incalculable goal. Now, the policy apparatus in the U.S., whether it's on Capitol Hill with sanctions or they just announced $200 million in additional arms for Ukraine, that seems to be the Defense Department bureaucracy's response to the summit. But the fact that continues on, President Putin has always been very savvy in saying what really matters is the word of the President of the United States. And that predates Donald Trump, by the way.
Can I just make one quick point about how American foreign policy is made? It's made by the President of the United States. The President has a lot of authority to make this. So you can say there's a hardening of a bipartisan consensus around Russia. The President decides American foreign policy. And by the way, the other salient, keep coming back to this point, 80%. The Republicans are with him. He gets to make foreign policy, and so Putin is getting something out of this.
You did hear from the Justice Department this week, Susan, though, with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein coming out and saying, we're going to alert people when they are the victims of foreign government targeting. You are seeing the bureaucracy or the infrastructure try to harden here, but is there a limit to what they can do?
Oh, yeah, there is a limit. There's only so much you can do when the president is running his administration and you're an administration official on some kind of different track. But you can do some things. And I think that the Deputy Attorney General was a signal of one thing, of not going through the White House. The White House, he did not indicate the White House would decide if Americans were going to be alerted to meddling in future elections. You saw that with Dan Coates and with Chris Wray, where you see some officials, I think, trying to stand up in a way we haven't seen before. But there are real limits what they can do because, as you say, the president is president. And particularly, this is why presidents love foreign policy when they get in trouble at home, because they have so much more sway there than they do on domestic affairs.
We had another report on Friday of past indiscretion of the president, allegedly, with this model and a recording of a conversation he supposedly had with his then attorney, Michael Cohen. Where do we frame this? Where do we put this in terms of some of these allegations of the president's past behavior?
I think the allegations about the president's personal behavior don't have much impact in our system anymore. I don't think people are surprised by them. I think the Russia allegations are much more serious to our constitutional system. The one way in which these could be serious is we don't know what else Michael Cohen knows and might be able to reveal and might have taped. Also, it could, of course, lead to criminal violations. There could be criminal cases coming out of this if it involved breaking of campaign finance laws.
The significance of having the President of the United States potentially caught on tape admitting to something in private that publicly they were denying, that hearing the voice of the President himself, if we ever hear this tape lying, would be something that, has a potential impact regardless of what the underlying story was. So I do agree that it does seem to be, baked into the cake at this moment in time. People have these very, very fixed views. This is a very divisive time, and so it's hard to get people to change their opinion about Donald Trump. But I do think we shouldn't understate the potential shock value of hearing whatever the president said on this tape.
Of all the things that could disturb and destabilize Donald Trump this week, all of the criticism, the fact that his lawyer has now evidently turned against him and has tapes and is willing to turn them over, that is the thing that's probably depressing him most today.
Ramesh, quickly, presidents typically don't touch the Justice Department. They also typically don't comment on the Federal Reserve. We had the president do both of those things this week. How should people understand the president's comments about how upset he is with his chairman?
Well, the president expressed frustration because he thinks he's doing a lot to stimulate the economy, and the Federal Reserve, by raising interest rates, is acting against that. It's the kind of frustration a lot of presidents have had. Typically, though, when presidents have expressed that kind of frustration, they've prompted a reaction by the Fed, which wants to guard its independence, and sometimes will go more in the direction the president doesn't want them to go for that reason. I think what you have here is a president who doesn't quite understand the norm of leaving the Fed alone or the reasons why that norm developed in the first place.
And
that was an understatement. That was an understatement.
And any comment obviously has market implications. Thank you to all of you. We will be back in just a moment. This week, CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe spoke with 4 South Florida voters, 2 Republican, 1 Democrat, and 1 independent. The conversation about the Trump-Putin summit revealed some deep divisions. Here's a quick look.
He's supposed to stand for America, the United States, and he didn't do a good job. I believe he didn't do what was necessary. And yes, he's trying. He's not a politician, but he's trying.
Steve?
I think the summit in Helsinki went very well. I thought the president did a great job. I don't understand these people that start screaming, every time Putin's name comes up. I mean, he's some evil boogeyman. I just don't buy it.
I think that if President Trump would find a cure for cancer, the Democrats would complain that he put undertakers out of work. The meeting went really well. What do they want him to do? Get up, put some gloves on, and kick his butt? He's not going to do that.
I think it was an embarrassment from the moment he landed in Europe. He appeared incompetent. He didn't know. He was not briefed. He could not answer questions properly as far as the meeting with Putin. I felt that he dishonored us and he mocked us the moment that he put Putin ahead of us.
Are you worried at all about Russian interference again this fall in the elections?
Not at all. I'm not worried about Russia interfering with our 2018 midterm elections at all. Actually, I believe President Putin when he said that they did not interfere with our elections in 2016.
So you believe Putin?
I believe Putin over our intelligence agencies, absolutely.
Why?
Our intelligence agencies under President Obama are rife with people that are on the left. They have their own agenda, and their agenda was to defeat Trump, and if Trump got elected, to impeach him.
Monica, Russians interfered in the elections?
Yes.
Okay. Are you worried it's going to happen again?
I do.
Everyone agrees that not one vote was changed in the 2016 election, even if the Russians did meddle or try to meddle.
There's not an if.
Not one vote was changed.
There's not an if.
You'll be able to see more of Ed's conversation on our website, facethenation.com, and on our digital network, CBSN.